Michael I. Niman is an American media scholar and journalist based in Buffalo, New York. He earned both a BA in Environmental Design and Planning and a PhD in American Studies at the University at Buffalo. In 2002 he joined the faculty of SUNY Buffalo State, later renamed Buffalo State College, as an assistant professor and has since risen to full professor of journalism and media studies. At Buffalo State he teaches journalism, media theory, and cultural studies courses. In parallel he has worked as a freelance journalist and syndicated columnist, earning recognition such as 2 Project Censored Awards for investigative writing. Niman's academic work focuses on media, propaganda, and nonviolent social movements. His research interests include nonviolence and temporary autonomous zones, as well as the impact of consumer culture and electronic media in the developing world. He has conducted ethnographic fieldwork in many countries including Costa Rica, Guatemala, Belize, Nicaragua, Cuba, Canada, and England. Niman is best known for his publications on countercultural communities, especially the Rainbow Family. Niman has long studied and participated in the Rainbow Family of Living Light, a loosely affiliated, leaderless movement of hippies that meets annually in U.S. national forests for free community gatherings. He emphasizes that anyone can join the family, once joking that anybody with a belly button is a rainbow. He describes the gatherings as intensely non-commercial, where all necessities such as food and firewood are shared freely and no money is used. In his studies, he explains that the family adheres to founding values of consensus, equality, and strict nonviolence. Gatherings are nonviolent, non-hierarchical, and non-commercial, representing a temporary utopia. Niman's scholarship also debunks myths about the rainbow community. He critically examined the widely circulated Hopi rainbow warrior prophecy and demonstrated that it is modern folklore rather than authentic indigenous tradition. He has studied the family's internal organization, including its volunteer Shanti Sena peacekeeping corps, and analyzed how it functions without formal policing. In media interviews, he has noted that heavy law enforcement crackdowns have reduced overall attendance at gatherings and shifted their demographics toward people seen as marginal or intimidating. Local and national outlets frequently cite Niman as an expert on the Rainbow Family's culture and history. Beyond academia, Niman is an active public commentator. He is a syndicated columnist whose work has received 2 Project Censored Awards, and his past columns are archived on mediastudy.com. He has written numerous opinion pieces on media, politics, and culture for outlets such as Truth Out, The Humanist, Alternet, Cold Type, and the Buffalo Alt Weekly The Public. His writing frequently explores contemporary issues through the lens of media analysis and social justice. Niman is also a frequent speaker and workshop leader, presenting talks on media literacy and activism at venues including the Chautauqua Institution and universities such as Cornell and Harvard Law. The introduction to the 2nd edition of People of the Rainbow reframes rainbow as contemporary and evolving, not a 1960s time capsule, marking its 40th year, its 3rd generation in Kitty Village, and a global spread of gatherings even as U.S. events have shrunk. It argues the ethos is diffused into mainstream life, public park drum circles, kid-centric schooling vibes, vegetarian/organic cuisine, and once fringe alternative medicine, calm style, now stocked in pharmacies and echoed by NIH, so people can find rainbow energy at home, reducing the pull to travel, especially amid fuel costs, footprint worries, police harassment, and the drag of a camp. The intro spotlights civic offshoots like Buffalo's Elmwood Festival of the Arts as rainbow-adjacent labor of love that channels gathering know-how to 100,000 neighbors, and describes the family's fission fusion pattern of dispersing skills into wider society. It previews added epilogues, one broad, one focused on the U.S. government, emphasizing how post-1997 law enforcement harassment has reshaped North American gatherings, and closes with acknowledgments to colleagues, mentors, and community who sustained the expanded edition. The preface lays out who the Rainbow Family is and what the book does: an egalitarian, nonviolent, non-commercial movement that has gathered in U.S. forests since 1972 to pray for peace and model a cooperative, money-free city governed by open councils and consensus. It previews the book's scope, how councils function, how kitchens, water, sanitation, and first aid make the city run, how conflicts are addressed without police, who participates and why, and how land stewardship is organized, while also promising a candid look at internal contradictions and the family's place in the longer history of North American utopias. Externally, it flags chapters on media portrayals, government treatment, and the fraught dynamics of cultural appropriation from native traditions. Methodologically, the study rests on participant observation, open-ended interviews, media content analysis, and government documents. The acknowledgements thank the Rainbow folks who made the work possible in the field, especially the Buffalo camp crews at the 1990 to 1991 gatherings, with shout-outs to tireless cook Dave Heatherly, Jose Rodriguez, and Field Horn, plus local allies who fed the kitchen and the author, Donna Smith and Michael Schwartz of Discount Natural Foods. The author credits journalistic comrades Bill Weinberg and Lisa Rentschler-Lavelle for ideas and feedback, photographers Gabe Kirchheimer and Joe Levy for images, and the open-minded residents of Cook County, Minnesota, Vicky and Sean Purick, Holly Nelson, and others, for hospitality. Academic thanks go to mentors Elwyn Powell, Charles Kyle, Lawrence Chisholm, Michael Frisch, and John Mohawk for long-running guidance. He highlights the Freedom of Information Act as crucial for Chapter 8 and other factual work, and closes with a wry nod to supermarket managers who don't lock their dumpsters. Sunflowers Day, July 3 opens at Buffalo Camp on the morning of July 3, where mist clings to the woods and the memory of a pre-dawn police helicopter still hums in Sunflower's head. A steady pulse of drums has been sounding since June 27, giving the gathering a heartbeat that contrasts with the sudden intrusions of Babylon. Sunflower frames the camp as a temporary city at its population peak, thousands of people coexisting by improvised norms and shared labor, yet designed to erase itself and return to wilderness by month's end. This tension between intensity and impermanence shapes the day. Sunflower has been on the land for 3 weeks, one of the early builders who dug latrines, raised kitchens, and cut trails. Having worked 16-hour days, he's in a brief, grateful lull, recharging before cleanup week. With that earned pause comes a reflective mood. He watches the ad hoc systems around him, food, water, sanitation, first aid, cohere without a central boss. The city is humming, and he's both participant and witness, attuned to small details that reveal how the whole thing works. Breakfast is mush and mud coffee, a sensory shorthand for camp life, smoky fire, clatter of pots, and easy banter that slides into dumpster diving lore. In the middle of this comfort he discovers a nuisance: his shoes are missing, turning the day into a barefoot quest. He still tends to small chores anyway, from dish duty to laying branches and rocks across a muddy stretch of trail. The missing shoes are a running gag and a real inconvenience, threading humor through the labor. As the day develops, Sunflower aims toward council, the place where big, shared matters are brought into the open. He'll drift that way along the social current of trails and kitchens, folding his shoe problem into the ongoing exchange of information and favors that council activates. The plan is casual but purposeful: move toward the community's deliberative center while staying available for whatever work or welcome arises en route. On the path he meets Plover, Asha, and Noah, a fruitarian, who are handing out plums, cosmetically flawed apples rescued from waste. The moment becomes a tiny lesson in Rainbow's food ethic: abundance can come from sharing and salvage, not price tags. A 5-year-old friend, Tom from Kids Village, punctuates the scene, showing how the camp's gift economy and intergenerational trust knit together. These encounters make the trail itself a social kitchen and classroom. Sunflower takes a turn greeting the steady stream of arrivals with the ritual welcome home, transforming strangers into participants at first touch. A first-timer who calls himself Sam the Hobo is quickly routed to a kitchen, the free box, and shelter, practical hospitality in action. Supplies also pour in: sacks of staples, garden vegetables, and baked goods from locals. The abundance contrasts with lean early seed camp days, when people survived on dumpstered potatoes, underscoring how the city scales through gifts. Asked to haul a box of medical supplies, Sunflower brings it to Calm, where the pharmacy and healing tents blur first aid with alternative care. Inside, a naked patient debates a homeopathic bee sting remedy while volunteers sort peroxide, bandages, and herbs. A Forest Service ranger named Lisa is on a massage table, visibly loosening her stance toward the gathering. Calm scenes range from acupuncture to tender, almost ceremonial first aid, sealed with a kiss illustrating a care network mixing pragmatism, play, and trust. A detour to Jesus Camp offers hot cocoa, guitars, and a garbage yoga station where recycling and composting are ritualized. In a small act of upcycling, a cleaned condensed milk can become a cup for the free box, turning trash into tools of hospitality. The mood is briefly pierced by a woman's shriek folded into a guitar-led call and response, an odd little liturgy that resolves into calm. It's emblematic Rainbow, spiritual, scrappy, and communal in the same breath. The chapter spotlights the workers, haulers, builders, cooks, cleaners, who keep the city running without titles or payrolls. Many are the very people Babylon stereotypes as bums, yet here they are the civic backbone, fueling the kitchens, digging the pits, and moving the loads. Mutual aid is the organizing principle, The free box, welcome gates, calm, counsel, and recycling flow together as a lived ethic. Work becomes a love language instead of wage logic. The presence of authority is never far, the helicopter that shredded the pre-dawn quiet, the ranger later receiving carrot calm. These touches of the state set a counterpoint to Rainbow's non-hierarchical rhythms, showing coexistence rather than clean separation. The city negotiates with Babylon by example, feeding, healing, welcoming, even as it braces for scrutiny. The friction is real, but so is the permeability between worlds. By day's end, sunflowers meander, welcoming, hauling, healing stops, cocoa, quick fixes, reads like a guided tour of the city's nervous system. The chapter seeds core themes the book will return to: a pop-up city that dissolves into wilderness, radical inclusion expressed as welcome home, anti-waste practices that conjure abundance, and pragmatic care networks that make leaderless cooperation tangible. All of it rides on the rhythm of shared work, carried by humor and small acts of service. In Roots, Rock, Rainbow emerges as a braid of influences rather than a single origin story. The gathering ethos blends religious communal discipline, Ricara exuberance, and long-standing American wanderer traditions into a culture that is both practical and celebratory. Unlike ascetic communes that center renunciation, Rainbow leans into joy, music, feasting, and festival energy, while somehow still mounting the heavy civic work of sanitation, water, first aid, and food service. The chapter sets this as its core claim: Rainbow succeeds not by copying one model, but by hybridizing many into a gift-based, temporarily self-sufficient city. Religious communes like the Hutterites demonstrate that cooperative economies can endure across generations, offering a repertoire of shared labor, pooled resources, and collective provisioning. Rainbow borrows those techniques, common kitchens, collective stewardship, and mutual responsibility, yet refuses the hierarchical structures, doctrinal boundaries, and formal membership that often accompany them. The lesson taken is operational, not theological. You can feed and house people together at scale, but you don't need clergy, bosses, or a rule book to pull it off. The festival and touring scenes of the late 1960s and 1970s provide Rainbow with its cultural vibe and logistics know-how. From Woodstock to Deadhead caravans, participants learned how to travel light, barter, and spin up ad hoc food networks around music and shared experience. Rainbow translates this into pop-up kitchens, drum circles, and a camp infrastructure that turns audience into participants. The beat isn't just soundtrack, it's social glue that draws strangers into crews, chores, and communal meals. Long before rock festivals, the U.S. had its own itinerant culture: hitchhikers, seasonal workers, automobile gypsies, and bohemians moving with harvests and fairs. Rainbow taps this lineage of roadcraft and makeshift homemaking, how to camp respectfully, improvise shelter, and share scarce resources among travelers. The chapter also nods to older European pilgrimage and fair traditions, suggesting that Rainbow resurrects a timeless, moving commons where temporary villages arise for celebration, trade of stories and skills, and then dissolve. At the heart of Rainbow is a gift economy. Food is cooked and served freely, gear circulates through free boxes, and help is offered without price. The culture resists turning the gathering into a marketplace or spectacle, vending is discouraged, and running a business on-site clashes with the ethic of unconditional hospitality. Scavenging, gleaning, and reuse aren't just frugal tactics but moral statements, proof that abundance can be created by sharing, rescuing waste, and decoupling care from money. Rainbow's organizing principle is the kitchen crew and the volunteer, small, self-starting groups that take on big civic tasks without central command. Water hauling, latrine digging, firewood processing, trash and compost management, and first aid all happen because people step up, not because they're assigned. Informal peacekeeping, Shanti/Sena style, relies on presence, de-escalation, and community norms rather than policing. The result is a resilient mesh of teams that coordinate horizontally, proving that complex work can be done through mutual aid. Family is a chosen identity, there are no membership roles, dues, or officers. Decisions that affect everyone are brought to open councils on the land, especially around July 1st to 7th, with consensus as the aspirational rule, agreement sought from all who are impacted. This slows things down but legitimizes outcomes, shifting power from edicts to persuasion and patient listening. The chapter emphasizes that process is the point, the real product of council is social trust and shared ownership, not just a decision. Rainbow's self-descriptions, always free, harmony, peace, non-hierarchy, anchor an internal narrative of service and cooperation. These claims clash with outside labels that caricature the scene as hedonistic or cultish, creating a tension the chapter explores. Participants frame cooking for strangers, hauling water, and caring for the injured as spiritual work, not charity or commerce. The ideology is deliberately simple and portable. Anyone can join, help, and be helped, no credentials required. The routes described here foreshadow the book's concrete mechanics: how free kitchens actually feed thousands, how sanitation stays ahead of the crowd, how calm treats sprains and overdoses, and how councils navigate conflict. They also set up Rainbow's relationships with neighbors and authorities, showing why a gift ethic and consensus can both charm and frustrate outsiders. The enduring paradox is the point of study: a raucous, leaderless festival that nonetheless does city-scale work, and then erases its footprint. The way we make decisions is more important than the decisions we make. The Rainbow Family Council argues that how Rainbow makes decisions, through consensus, ritual, and radical inclusion, is the real engine of its politics. Council is less a parliament and more a civic classroom where people learn the culture by doing it in public. Because there's no enforcement arm, the authority of council rests on legitimacy and buy-in. Its power is moral rather than coercive, and that's intentional. The method itself, slow, participatory, relationship-centered, is treated as the enduring achievement, even when outcomes are messy. Council is a family of formats, not a single meeting. Main Council, July 1st to 7th, is where the whole North American family addresses big tent policy on the land. Seed Camp Councils handle practical setup and emergent issues before the peak days. Functional Councils, kitchen, banking/supply, coordinate-specific systems. Social circles like Heartsong can morph into business when needed. Together, these bodies create a distributed governance web that scales from campfire to city. Any participant can call a council, but the call only gains legitimacy if it reaches everyone affected. The convener announces a time and place, then does the legwork, walking camps, speaking at meal circles, visiting kitchens, to invite broad participation. The inclusivity test is real. If key stakeholders aren't present, you bring them in or reconvene. Authority comes from openness and effortful outreach, not from titles. Councils typically begin with shared ritual, conch to the four directions, a moment of silence, an ohm, and hand-holding, to tune the group for patient listening. The circle often starts with Heartsong for connection, then shifts into business. A talking object, the feather, focuses attention so one person speaks at a time. Facilitators keep the vibe respectful and the cue fair, balancing emotional expression with the practical need to move proposals forward. The initiator frames the agenda and shepherds inclusivity, focalizers/facilitators mind the flow and accessibility, informal stewards track notes, time, and side errands. None of these roles confer authority over outcomes, they're service positions meant to keep the circle coherent. When done well, roles are light touch and portable, making it easy for newcomers to step in without fear of breaking protocol. Consensus aims for decisions everyone can live with, favoring iterative adjustment over win/lose votes. Proposals are clarified, tweaked, or split. Small huddles may draft amendments. Facilitators sense when the circle is ready. A block is a serious veto used when someone believes a proposal violates core values or causes direct harm. Blockers are expected to articulate reasons and offer alternatives. The culture leans toward unity, but not at the cost of silencing conscience. A council's decisions carry weight only if those impacted had a real chance to participate. If crucial folks are missing, the circle sends runners, pauses, or reconvenes to fold them in. Only in cases of willful avoidance does council proceed without them, and then cautiously. Seed Camp Councils resolve immediate logistics. Main Council is reserved for family-wide policy, preserving a clear boundary of legitimacy. When an ad hoc gate crew unilaterally managed road access, Council convened to address both the immediate friction and underlying process drift. The circle handled water safety, fundraising, Magic Hat, and the gate dispute, issuing moral decisions that sometimes outpaced what could be enforced on the ground. Delegations approached absent stakeholders to bridge the gap. The real win was recommitting the community to process, even when compliance lagged. Even open forums can reproduce dominant voices, often male, through volume and confidence. Rainbows experiment with procedural nudges, structured turns, conscious facilitation, and, in some places, separate lines or prompts, to amplify muted voices. The point isn't purity, it's acknowledgement and iteration, noticing Babylon's habits when they leak in and redesigning the process to be more genuinely inclusive. Decisions only matter if they turn into work, moving water, placing kitchens, putting up signs, and funding fixes through Magic Hat. Info booths, ride boards, and rumor control keep everyone updated while crews carry out tasks. Feedback loops are short. If a plan falters, a new council or quick huddle can adjust, so governance and operations braid together in near real time. Agencies often want a negotiable leader, but Rainbow insists the leader is the process. This mismatch creates friction, occasionally fueling misreadings of leaderlessness as irresponsibility. Rainbow's strategy is to show its governance in action, open councils, public decisions, transparent logistics, to build credibility without abandoning consensus. The chapter treats this as ongoing diplomacy between two political grammars. Consensus Council shines at inclusion, legitimacy, and culture building, especially for complex, value-laden issues. It can be slow, exhausting, and vulnerable to shadow authority or uneven implementation when key actors ignore the process. Paradoxically, when systems hum, there's less need for main council. When frictions spike, council becomes the communal reset button. The model's resilience lies in its capacity to self-critique and iterate. In the end, council's greatest product isn't policy but people, participants trained in listening, patience, and shared responsibility. Decisions dissolve back into daily labor, yet the social fabric thickens with each circle. That's the chapter's claim. The Rainbow family's durable innovation is a way of deciding together that can hold a temporary city without bosses, and then help it vanish without a trace. The nuts and bolts of making a rainbow. Rainbow infrastructure frames Rainbow's invisible systems, food, water, sanitation, health, and information, as the backbone that turns a forest into a functioning, money-free city. Because there's no central authority or vendors, service is a cultural practice rather than a transaction. People step in, teach each other, and build what's needed with what's on hand. Logistics must scale fast in remote terrain, so designs favor simplicity, redundancy, and widespread know-how over specialized control. The more people who can do a task, the more resilient the system is when crowds surge. Kitchens are the social and nutritional core, ranging from iconic anchors like brouhaha and donut/taco to specialized setups in Kids Village. A typical layout manages fire safety, prep/serve flow, and dish lines to move thousands of meals smoothly. Food arrives through gifts, gleaning, and blooms, with attention to dietary needs and the no-vending ethic. A daily kitchen council coordinates menus for main circle dinners, trades staples, and solves bottlenecks. Basic food safety, boiling, hand-wash buckets, labeling, keeps a gift system both generous and safe. Water starts with scouts locating springs and protecting them from contamination, then moves via gravity-fed pipe runs or brute force hauling to where people cook and wash. Treatment is everyone's job, boiling, filtering, or dosing with chlorine/iodine, always in clean containers. Clear signage distinguishes raw from potable, and veterans pass along simple protocols that any crew can adopt quickly. Because power is distributed, training and visible reminders matter more than enforcement, keeping safe water flowing without centralized control. Sanitation design begins with siting. Latrines go in the right soil, far from water, with lids and ash/lime to control flies and odor. Crews build sturdy seats and maintain privacy and cleanliness, while dish stations use a 3-bucket system: scrub, rinse, sanitize, to prevent cross-contamination. Greywater pits and sumps disperse dirty water safely, and biodegradable soap norms protect nearby streams. Posted instructions and regular check-ins make hygiene a shared habit rather than a lecture. Fire is both kitchen engine and risk, so wood teams harvest only dead and down and keep it dry and staged. Kitchens balance rocket stoves or contained setups with open fires, using spark control, clear fire lanes, and water buckets to prevent flare-ups. A basic safety culture, watchers at busy hearths, quick sand/soil smothering, and agreed upon shutdown cues, lets many cooks work close together without courting disaster. Rainbow maps itself as it grows. Main trails carry heavy foot traffic, while spurs reach camps and kitchens, with stepping logs, corduroy, and small bridges to protect soil. Zones reduce friction. Kids Village, Info, Kitchens, and the main meadow each have a place, and wayfinding, signs, flags, night markers, helps first-timers navigate. Light touch engineering favors reversible fixes and erosion control, so that the forest can heal quickly after people leave. Calm blends a pharmacy, triage, and rest space with bodywork and prevention. Volunteers treat cuts, sprains, bites, and dehydration, while also doing kitchen and latrine hygiene checks and advising on improvements. When necessary, COM works with supply and council to pause or fix unsanitary operations, aiming for education first and closure only as a last resort. The result is a health system that's accessible, low cost, and woven into daily camp life. Main supply is the intake and distribution hub for staples, produce, and gear, feeding kitchens and projects that keep the city running. Funding flows from the magic hat, past the bowl dances and circles, so urgent needs like truck drinking water can be covered without tickets or sales. Runners, carts, and small depots move goods from the roadhead to deep camps, with priority going to kitchens, comm, and sanitation during the busiest days. The info center, rumor control anchors communication with ride boards, lost and found, and posted updates on everything from water status to mealtime changes. Announcements ripple through conch calls, runners, and kitchen circles to reach folks beyond the bulletin boards. Simple maps and clear, consistent signage keep people oriented, while feedback from the boards and the trails loops back into council and kitchen planning. Garbage yoga stations sort waste into free, lost and found, compost, paper, plastic, metal, and glass, turning disposal into a participatory ritual. Kitchens separate scraps at the source, manage oil and ash responsibly, and encourage everyone to upcycle, tin can cups, margarine tub bowls, so fewer disposables are needed. Endgame plans cover pack out and last day sweeps, with micro trash patrols to make no trace real, not aspirational. Kids Village tailors infrastructure for families, calmer soundscapes, kid-friendly meals, shared childcare, and easy access to calm for scrapes or reunifications. Sanitation is sited and maintained with little bodies in mind, and play areas are set away from high-traffic trails and kitchen hazards. The zone models how design choices, food, hygiene, layout, shape safety and comfort for specific communities within the larger city. To keep the forest walkable and safe, vehicles are staged at gates or bus villages, with shuttles and gear hauling strategies to reduce road congestion. Clear trailhead orientation and signage prevent confusion as crowds arrive, and emergency ingress/egress is kept open by design. The goal is to balance accessibility with the environmental and social costs of driving deep into camp. Shanti Sena, a peer-based presence, helps diffuse conflict without policing, showing up early, listening, and moving energy away from flashpoints. Night Vibe is managed through neighbor norms and soft lighting cues, with calm and info stepping in when something scales beyond a single camp's capacity. Safety, like everything else, is participatory. Many small, caring interventions prevent a few big crises. Strike plans reverse the build, kitchens deconstruct, latrines are properly closed, pipes come up, and trails get water bars, brush, or duff to erase signs of compaction. Scar remediation, reseeding where appropriate, disguising campsites, lifting fire rings, helps the site rebound. Final sweeps target micro trash and forgotten caches, aiming for a walkthrough that looks and feels like unvisited forest. 3 principles keep the machine humane: service as spiritual practice, always free, distributed know-how that welcomes new hands, and tight linkage to council so decisions and operations inform each other. Veterans teach by doing, first-timers learn by helping, and the whole city iterates in place. The chapter's practical claim is simple: Rainbow works at scale because the culture and the infrastructure are the same project. The people of the Rainbow chapter treats Rainbow as a self-chosen, radically broad identity that resists the narrow hippie stereotype. Instead of a single type, it offers a mosaic built from snapshots, people with different ages, skills, beliefs, and backstories, held together by shared practices rather than a doctrine. By foregrounding vignettes over categories, it argues that belonging is performed through participation. If you show up to feed, haul, heal, sing, or welcome, you're already inside the circle. Rainbow spans kids to elders, students to road-worn travelers, professionals to retirees, with flows of first-timers and veterans returning year after year. People find the gatherings through friends, ride boards, chance encounters, or a scrap of news, and many come back because they felt both needed and at home. The chapter maps these varied entries into a single commons, where differences in age and class become sources of complementary strengths. A small lexicon, welcome home. Always free, the conch call, the feather, encodes a culture of gift hospitality and non-vending. Service is treated as spiritual practice, chopping veggies, digging, and tending to wounds are ways of praying with one's hands. Rituals like Om circles tune people toward listening and cooperation, setting a baseline of respect from which practical work can proceed. People's roles crystallize around what they reliably do: kitchen anchors who orchestrate meals, water/wood/latrine crews who keep the infrastructure alive, calm caregivers who blend first aid with prevention, and info runners who stitch the city together. Shanti add a quiet layer of safety by modeling de-escalation. These identities are fluid, apprenticed by doing, so newcomers can step into meaningful work quickly. Rainbow is a braided culture. Drummers, pickers, storytellers, and trail minstrels animate the commons, while road dogs and seed camp stalwarts carry much of the heavy lift before and after peak days. Spiritual diversity is conspicuous: Jesus camp, Krishna, pagans, skeptics, yet the gathering remains non-sectarian, letting many paths share the same fires. Regional caravans and traveling families add dialects of food, song, and campcraft. Aspirations of inclusivity meet the realities of social habit, with the chapter noting both male voice dominance and ongoing attempts to rebalance the floor. Parenting is communally supported, kids' village as a hub, and child safety is treated as a shared duty rather than a private burden. Consent talk and harm reduction practices surface as everyday ethics, aiming to make intimacy and care less risky and more mutual. The vision is multicultural, but participation is filtered by who can travel, camp, and afford time away from work. Rainbow's counterweights, free boxes, shared gear, donated rides, and open kitchens lower some barriers without pretending to erase them. Outreach to neighbors and new folks tries to widen the circle, while the chapter stays honest about gaps between the ideal and the demographic that actually arrives. Outside the woods, people weave together seasonal work, touring, odd jobs, homesteading, and stretches of wintering down. Skills honed at Rainbow: large-scale cooking, building, herbal care, logistics, carry over to Babylon livelihoods. The chapter tracks a balancing act. Many reject on-site commodification while still navigating cash economies the rest of the year. Word of mouth is the primary carrier, amplified by ride boards, notes, always free, and phone trees, networks that move news without central control. Focalizers informally connect regions, pointing people toward dates, directions, and needs while avoiding titles or authority. Stories, jokes, and camp lore bind strangers into a remembered we, making information feel like kinship rather than broadcast. Neighbors appear as both skeptics and allies, sometimes offering baked goods and produce, sometimes bristling at crowds and noise. Media narratives tend to flatten the scene. The chapter contrasts headlines with the mundane reality of work and welcome. Encounters with officials are ongoing diplomacy, with rainbows demonstrating their governance and sanitation to earn space for their experiment. Any open city has edges, camp drinking zones, scammers, and frictions that test patience. The response leans on peers over police, early attention, collective boundaries, and gestures that let dignity and safety coexist. Each incident seeds a lesson: layouts change, norms are clarified, and next time the city is a bit wiser about where to place kitchens, trails, and sleeping areas. The arc often runs from first hug to first helpful task, then into steadier roles as trust and skill grow. Burnout is acknowledged, people step back and later return as teachers and gentle anchors. Mentorship is informal but constant: someone hands you a pot, a map, or a feather, and memory keeping turns practical tricks into tradition. Short profiles sketch emblematic figures: a kitchen anchor who finds worship in the wok, a calm first aider whose kit mixes gauze with garlic, a road-seasoned seed camper who loves rebar and rain, a parent juggling naps and noodles in kids' village, and a first-timer who stayed to help and never quite left. Each portrait shows how identity is woven from service, not slogan. Unity comes from shared practices, consensus, hospitality, mutual aid, rather than agreement on beliefs. People can sing different songs and still haul the same water when it's time. The chapter underscores a paradox embraced as strength: a many-voiced crowd that can align around work, because the work is the culture. People of the Rainbow names a civic identity forged by doing for one another in a temporary city. Diversity becomes an asset when paired with service, as differences translate into complementary roles. The chapter closes by tying people back to the book's through line: it's these practices, carried in these bodies, that make councils function and infrastructure hum. Violence and Peace argues that Rainbow's approach to violence is fundamentally procedural. Peace is created through practices, love-forward presence, ritual, and inclusion, rather than asserted by slogans or enforced by a badge. It sets up a running contrast between the ideal, anyone can help keep the peace, conflicts are met with care, and the messy realities of a large, temporary city. The frame is pragmatic: methods matter because they shape outcomes, and when methods drift toward coercion, the culture drifts with them. Shanti begins as a principle: Everybody is a peacekeeper when needed, but the chapter shows how a quasi-elite organization sometimes forms, complete with private huddles and gatekeeping. Outsiders and media often prefer that tidy picture, calling Shanti Sena a security force, which pressures the family to resemble the hierarchies it rejects. Inside the circle, rainbows critique this creep toward authority, pushing back against strong-arming, covert councils, and any posture that treats people as clients to be managed rather than kin to be calmed. On the ground, de-escalation is more choir than command, Om circles to tune the room, one voice focus so people feel heard, music and hugs to soak up heat, and widening the circle until aggression feels out of place. Runners fetch those affected, folding them into the fix, small councils surface needs and negotiate next steps. The chapter contrasts scenes where loving presence melts a flashpoint with moments when the vibe turns adversarial, and shows why the former travels better across a leaderless city. To keep armed agencies from escalating routine friction, rainbows sometimes manifest a visible peace presence at gates, greeting officers, answering questions, and demonstrating self-governance. The tactic works but carries a hazard. After hours of cop talk, volunteers can come back wearing a policey posture. The chapter threads the needle, use interface teams to buy space and time, but keep them tethered to non-coercive norms so the culture doesn't absorb the very habits it's trying to displace. A key norm is sanctuary. Don't turn people over to police or mental health custody without council approval, and try communal remedies first. That means cooling off zones, caretaking buddies, restorative relocation, and follow-up rather than offloading to punitive systems. The rationale is both ethical and practical, meeting harm with care models alternatives, maintains trust, and avoids spirals of force, while acknowledging that council retains authority to decide exceptional handoffs when safety truly demands it. Most daily frictions, petty theft, harassment, line blowups, are handled with early attention and soft tools, separate parties, feed and hydrate, re-cue with dignity, and use humor or song to reset the tone. When a hotspot won't cool, the repertoire escalates non-violently, bigger circles, clearer boundaries, temporary pauses on an area, and a quick return to council to adjust design or staffing. The emphasis is on restoring participation, not extracting obedience, so people can re-enter the commons without stigma. The chapter treats a camp as Rainbow's most persistent challenge, an alcohol-dense zone where fights and chaos spike. Strategies include siting it at the edge, buffering trails, limiting engagement to trained or steady volunteers, and preventing spillover into kitchens and kids' spaces. Experiments like Loving a Camp seek to flip the script with steady kindness and sober examples. When that fails or tension rises, the family relies on its band-like flexibility to scatter and regroup rather than become a police force. Even in a culture of openness, loud male voices and confrontational styles can dominate peace work. The chapter argues for intentional counterweights, recruiting more women and soft-spoken facilitators, modeling non-threatening presence, and practicing role-plays so volunteers have alternatives to command and control reflexes. Training matters because vibe is contagious. The more the circle normalizes patient listening and clear boundaries without threat, the less likely it is to reproduce the hierarchies it rejects. Officials and press often prefer frames about order, infiltrators, and tight controls, which justify surveillance and invite Rainbow to perform as a mini police department. The chapter explains why those stories stick, bureaucracies distrust leaderless peaceability, and details Rainbow's rebuttal. There are no outsiders, only neighbors, and the proof of capacity is public, open councils and transparent hygiene and logistics. The goal is to protect the experiment from being narrated into something it isn't. Building a non-violent micro-society inside a violent macro-society leaks at the edges. Sometimes coercion appears, sometimes hotspots win around. Yet the chapter catalogs real wins, cross-class recruitment, countless small de-escalations, and design fixes after each flare-up, while naming the core tension. Excluding bad actors would be easy but would forfeit the claim that hierarchy and punishment aren't necessary. Instead, Rainbow iterates, aiming for fewer crises and faster, kinder recoveries. The conclusion reframes peacekeeping as distributed labor woven through kitchens, trails, gates, and councils rather than a specialized unit. Ritual, procedure, and care form a durable braid, tune hearts with Om, include all affected through counseling, and meet heat with practical kindness. Because every incident teaches, the repertoire thickens over time, letting a vast, cashless, leaderless city remain livable without turning its peace workers into cops. The Fakelore chapter defines fakelore as stories, prophecies, and traditions that are invented or misattributed yet circulate inside Rainbow as if they were authentic, and it argues this isn't harmless color. It reshapes how people see native histories and Rainbow itself. To make the case, it reads key texts closely, traces how particular claims show up at gatherings, and follows how press narratives harden into truth. The scope is both inward and outward, why these myths feel good to rainbow folks, and what they cost communities whose names and symbols are borrowed. A centerpiece is Willoya and Brown's Warriors of the Rainbow, which blends covert Christian proselytizing and anti-Semitic notes into a pan-Indian prophecy that many rainbows have treated as foundational scripture. The chapter shows how zines and authors, for example, Always Free, Ruse Buenfiel, amplify it as a movement charter, while contrasting it with actual Hopi and Haudenosaunee teachings. In practice, the book swaps real specificity for a Genesis-style, one-size-fits-all rainbow covenant, erasing the distinct voices it pretends to honor. Indigenous leaders, notably from the Lakota/Dakota/Nakota nations, have named this borrowing as exploitation, plastic medicine men, spiritual genocide, and identity erasure, culminating in public declarations against the misuse of ceremonies. The chapter lays out why mixing and matching isn't benign. It distorts living traditions, undermines sovereignty, and feeds a market in exoticized spirituality. Rainbow, it says, stands at a fork: either confront folklore and change practices, or keep basking in a flattering Indian mirror that harms others. Zooming into concrete episodes, the chapter recounts how a 1984 Pitt River prophecy suddenly surfaced to justify staying despite opposition, how a Quebec site labeled sacred by rainbows was described by local Montagnais as a dump, and how blessings were sought from the wrong Haudenosaunee nation. Each vignette shows the same pattern: post hoc sacralization and name-dropping to cover logistical or political conflicts, with folklore doing the work of consent that real relationships and protocols should have done. Rainbow's blind spots aren't new. The chapter situates them in a longer U.S. history where high-minded reformers and communes planted projects on indigenous territories while preaching equality. Brief sketches, from Plockhoy to Amana to Mormon settlement, illustrate how admirable ideals can ride on colonial geographies. The moral isn't that utopianism is fake, but that good intentions don't neutralize land politics. If anything, they can make rationalizations more persuasive. Folklore answers felt needs, an origin story that flatters, a simple moral arc, a portable spirituality that stitches strangers into a we, and a reason to feel chosen. It spreads easily through camp talk, workshops, signs, and zines, where repetition confers credibility and critique risks killing the magic. The chapter stresses that emotional utility is precisely why folklore must be interrogated. Comfort isn't the same as truth, and unexamined myths drift into practice fast. Outside the circle, small towns and regional papers spin their own legends, gatherings become county lore, told and retold long after the vans roll out, while sheriff's briefings and agency videos seed durable cliches for journalists. This produces a feedback loop: official frames, no rules, security force, plus local rumor get printed as facts, which later stories cite as sources. Rainbow thus lives in two mythologies at once, the ones it crafts for itself and the ones crafted about it. The chapter reminds readers that rainbow spirituality is actually plural. Jesus camp and Krishna tent sit alongside pagans, skeptics, and eclectic seekers. That diversity offers a path out of appropriation: practice your tradition honestly, learn from neighbors with consent, and stop performing as someone else. The point isn't to flatten difference, but to separate appreciation, relationships, listening, support, from performance, costuming, borrowed prophecies, that treats living cultures as props. Concrete fixes follow: vet sources and retire warrior-style quotes, use proper protocols by consulting the correct nation, accepting no, and respecting land status, and shift from scripting indigenous presence to supporting real indigenous struggles, voices, and ceremonies without claiming them. The chapter frames this as both ethical hygiene and practical politics. Cleaner stories reduce harm, prevent public backfires, and build relationships that can survive scrutiny. The closer argues that folklore exacts two costs: outward harm to native peoples and inward damage to rainbow's integrity, and that accuracy is not a buzzkill but a sturdier foundation. When stories are sourced and permissions honored, the culture becomes more resilient and less vulnerable to embarrassment or conflict. The invitation is simple: curate what you repeat, retire what isn't yours, and let a truer rainbow stand without stolen rainbows holding up the sky. The mediated rainbow. The American media look at the rainbow family looks at how rainbow gets constructed for the public by reporters, TV crews, and especially government briefings, then tests those portrayals against what participants and on-the-ground observations say actually happened. The author samples wires like UPI, small town and metro papers, television clips, and Forest Service documents to map the recurring angles. The method is comparative: tally who gets quoted, track which talking points repeat across years, and contrast official narratives with first-hand accounts to see how a frame becomes the story. Coverage often defaults to a caricature, hippies who are naked, high, and ruleless, with reporters compressing a multi-generational crowd into a narrow age band and leaning on set-piece clichés. Even when the scene is mundane, meals, childcare, cleanup, the language implies freak show or free-for-all. A common tic is both sides phrasing that presumes conflict with authorities while still sourcing almost entirely from those authorities, turning Rainbow into a foil against which official competence can be displayed. Because many stories are built primarily from Forest Service and police quotes, the incident command worldview dominates. A gathering is a problem to manage, like a wildfire, and success is defined by no incidents. That lens shifts attention away from civic work, water lines, kitchens, sanitation, first aid, and toward risk scoring and control measures. The result is a steady narrative gravity. Even peaceful, well-run events are graded on hazard mitigation rather than community function. Sheriff briefings, agency videos, and pre-written talking points feed reporters on deadline, who then turn that material into first drafts for local consumption. Those pieces are echoed by regional outlets and wire services, cementing the frame. Managed access, tours, media centers, chaperone site visits, further shapes what gets seen and quoted. Over time, the pipeline produces durable clichés that future reporters inherit as context, making the official angle self-reinforcing. Not all coverage is grim. Some editorials and local stories highlight minimal arrests, cooperative vibes, and meticulous cleanup, sometimes quoting rangers who say the site was left better than found. Pieces on habitat work, tree planting, or helpful spillover spending do appear, but they rarely get the amplification of incident-driven reports. These counter-narratives show that when reporters encounter receipts, measurable work and credible sources, the story can swing toward civic achievement. Rainbow's own cleanup ethic, pack it out, garbage yoga stations, stay behind crews, is both a practice and a public argument, because visible restoration counters fears of environmental damage. The chapter contrasts the norm, praised exits and skills shared with rangers, with the North Carolina 1987 outlier, where harassment and access issues spiraled into a politicized failure. That single case then echoed in later coverage, illustrating how cleanup outcomes shape a gathering's reputation long after the tents are gone. Sound bites bundling drugs with child molesting travel far, even when enforcement sweeps turn up little. Sensational claims linger because they're vivid and align with pre-existing fears, while corrections are dull and late. The chapter shows how these themes become stock paragraphs in stories, crowding out context about on-site norms, peer response, and family infrastructure, and how the absence of data rarely inhibits repetition once a panic narrative is in circulation. Rainbow's response is mostly show, don't tell, invite reporters to walk the kitchens and water lines, route them through info, and share printed materials that document norms and plans. Reprints and letters can correct the record without trying to manage the news, which journalists resent. The danger comes when trying to appease officials by acting like a security force. That performance can inadvertently validate the very frames, hierarchy, policing, that Rainbow wants to dislodge. Before a gathering, rural communities brace for impact, worries about trash, traffic, youth, and tourism, because early stories frame an onslaught. Afterward, the same event can settle into local lore, sometimes fondly, as residents remember the spectacle, the cleanup, or the economic bump. The chapter argues that proactive neighbor relations and cooperative projects can bend this arc toward acceptance, giving future reporters and officials a different set of quotes to circulate. UPI pieces are pulled apart for their sourcing imbalance and cartoonish descriptors. By contrast, some local outlets in places like the Allegheny or Buffalo regions produce uneventful or even appreciative coverage when they see the operation up close. Cook County, Minnesota, is a study in echo chambers. Sheriff briefings and hostile agency tapes seed press narratives that then validate more briefings, illustrating how a single county can incubate a durable myth about who the Rainbows are. Participants need media literacy, expect preloaded frames and meet them with specifics, how sanitation works, what the safety norms are, who's on cleanup, and invite verification. Tactically, make the civic work public and legible, posted water and hygiene plans, visible crews, clear maps, and documented follow-through. Relationship building with editors, reporters, and local officials creates a bench of credible voices and receipts, so when controversy flares, there's evidence to quote, not just assurances. In the end, the mediated Rainbow is a tug-of-war between an incident-obsessed bureaucracy and a self-portrait of a functioning civic commons. Accurate, source stories lower friction, less unnecessary policing, smoother permits, calmer neighbors, because they replace fear with facts. The strategic takeaway is to keep doing the work in public and archiving it. Over time, consistent receipts can rewrite the script, turning a problem to manage into a community that manages itself. Leave only smiles. Land stewardship and community relations frames leave only smiles as Rainbow's practical ethic. Arrive with minimal impact, tread gently, and depart having improved the land and the relationships around it. Stewardship isn't a publicity move but a daily, shared discipline that builds credibility with neighbors and agencies. The stakes are ecological health, social license to gather, and the family's long-term ability to return, so care for place and people is treated as core infrastructure, not an afterthought. Stewardship starts at the trailhead. Pack light so you can pack out, pocket your own micro-trash, and treat every walk as a mini-sweep. Throughout the event, crews and passers-by remove litter as they go, while endgame plans include stay-behind teams and final walkthroughs to ensure the site reads as undisturbed forest. The idea is a continuous loop: prevent mess, reduce what's produced, and clean as you move, so strike day is a tidy finale, not a crisis. Garbage yoga turns sorting into culture. Stations are clearly marked for free: lost and found, compost, paper, plastic, metal, and glass, with kitchens separating at the source and handling oils and ash responsibly. Upcycling, like tin can cups and margarine tub bowls, reduces disposables while teaching thrift by example. Signage, demos, and friendly monitors make the system intuitive and social, so recycling and reuse feel like shared ritual rather than scolding rules. Protecting land means smart siting and closure of latrines, keeping proper setbacks, using ash/lime, and disguising filled pits. Dish lines run through strainers and sanitize properly, while gray water goes to well-built sumps and biodegradable soaps minimize residue. Springs are tapped and shielded, potable sources are labeled and maintained, and when the city vanishes those systems are decommissioned cleanly, preventing contamination before it starts. Fuel is dead and down only, staged and kept dry to minimize cutting and smoke, and fires are contained with spark control, water at hand, and watchers on duty. Footpaths get lightweight engineering, corduroy, stepping logs, and water bars, to keep mud from becoming erosion scars. Minimal rings, careful ash handling, and thoughtful wood-use mean cooks can feed thousands without tearing up soil or risking wildfire. Kitchens are placed for drainage and safe flow, with mats or tarps under high traffic zones to protect duff and soil. Grease and rinse protocols deter wildlife while keeping waterways clean, and signs make it simple for volunteers to follow the plan. When striking, crews dismantle ovens and frames, haul poles and tarps, and return ash to designated pits, leaving the ground textured and natural rather than compacted and bare. Strike is surgical: replace duff where it was compressed, brush in social trails, smooth ruts to natural contours, and seed or mulch where appropriate. In wet spots, live staking or willow wattles stabilize soil and encourage regrowth. The last pass is a micro-trash comb with fresh eyes, followed by a last to leave verification so nothing, from a twist tie to a tarp grommet, gets left behind. Good outcomes start early: share maps, agree on protection zones, riparian buffers, meadows, and keep walk-alongs with rangers routine before, during, and after. Cooperative projects, tree planting, trail repair, habitat tweaks, turn suspicion into partnership and leave tangible benefits. Joint inspections and clear contacts create a feedback loop where improvements can be requested and delivered in real time. Neighboring communities want assurances about trash, traffic, youth, and fire. Rainbow meets those fears with concrete plans, not platitudes. Buying local, avoiding known bad actors, and steering clear of sensitive sites reduce friction, while visible gestures, roadside litter pickups, helping with traffic, and thank you notes, build goodwill. The aim is to be helpful guests whose presence feels like a contribution, not a burden. Information is operational: bulletin boards list cleanup shifts and sweep routes, maps show recycling and no camp zones, and signs clearly mark potable versus raw water and latrines. Making sanitation and restoration work visible helps participants join in and gives visitors, neighbors, and media something accurate to see. By broadcasting the plan, the city makes it easy to do the right thing without constant oversight. The Magic Hat funds essentials: drinking water, hauling, tools, seed, while main supply and runners move gloves, bags, and gear where they're needed. Cleanup focalizers coordinate crews and transport to transfer stations, tracking the flow of materials so nothing piles up. Transparency about what the hat buys and where it goes turns donations into trust and keeps stewardship resourced when it matters most. Parking areas and roadheads get extra attention: butt cans, daily sweeps, sometimes porta potties, because first impressions matter and traffic concentrates waste. Buffering a camp protects kitchens, kids' village, and waterways, while contingency plans for flood, fire, or wildlife prioritize moving people, securing hazards, and letting the land recover. Edge cases are handled by design and clear boundaries, not wishful thinking. When cleanup lags, the chapter urges root cause analysis. Was access blocked? Were crews exhausted? Did signs fail? Or did harassment derail plans? Councils debrief what to change in siting, signage, staffing, or timelines, and the results get published as receipts to rebuild trust. Treating errors as curriculum prevents repeats and shows neighbors and land managers that lessons become policy. Communities remember what they see: trails repaired, meadows reseeded, and habitat improved, dollars left at stores without trash left in the woods. Positive exits compound. Each good departure lowers the temperature for the next invite and gives local officials quotes they can use. The smile is both landscape and sentiment, a site read as healthy and a town that felt respected. Leave Only Smiles binds ethos to daily ops, everyone's job, every day, with ecology and relationships reinforcing each other. Do the land work well and neighbors say yes again? Do relationships well and land work gets easier? The city disappears on purpose, but its care leaves a residue of goodwill, making the next gathering possible and the promise of a lighter touch more believable. The rainbow in the U.S. government sets up the fundamental clash between a fluid, consensus-based, gift economy city and a hierarchical state built on command and control. On one side are rainbow's claims to free assembly and shared stewardship of public lands, on the other are agencies tasked with safety, order, and liability. The stakes include constitutional rights, access to national forests, public money and staffing, and each party's legitimacy in the eyes of locals and the press. The chapter treats the encounter as an ongoing negotiation rather than a one-off fight. The U.S. Forest Service is the primary actor because most big gatherings happen on its land, but sheriffs, state police, U.S. Marshals, DEA, Border Patrol, and even FEMA appear as the scene scales. Each agency brings its own mission vocabulary: risk, interdiction, compliance, which tends to translate a cooperative, temporary city into an incident to manage. This multiplicity amplifies bureaucracy's need for clear points of contact, a need Rainbow resists by design, fueling friction about who speaks for whom. Government deployments come with budgets, per diems, base camps, air assets, and a visible posture that signals seriousness to the public. The chapter notes a recurring dynamic: when large forces are staged for low-incident events, boredom and sunk costs can create needless interventions that then justify the staging. Budgets become part of the narrative loop, evidence of a problem to be managed, while for rainbows the same spending reads as theater that crowds out collaboration and common sense. At the regulatory heart lies the special use/group use permit, the state's tool for conditioning access versus Rainbow's refusal to pre-clear a First Amendment assembly. The chapter traces early attempts to sign permits and the piling on of stipulations that made compliance feel like prior restraint. Over time, Rainbow's stance hardened into principle: we don't sign away our rights, while the Forest Service framed permits as neutral safety and resource tools, setting up a constitutional and cultural impasse. When the standoff escalates, it moves to federal court, where judges weigh assembly rights and due process against agency authority and environmental statutes like NEPA. The narrative catalogs emergency rulemaking, attempts to enjoin gatherings, and rulings that chastise hostile or pretextual enforcement while narrowing injunctions to specific harms. Outcomes produce a patchwork of lessons. Agencies are warned off using environmental law to suppress speech, and Rainbow sees the value of documentation and legal readiness. Bureaucracies prefer stable interlocutors, so they identify or even manufacture leaders to sign agreements, while Rainbow insists decisions live in open councils. The chapter surveys operating agreements, MOs, and on-the-fly compliance deals that sometimes work pragmatically yet undermine Rainbow legitimacy if they bypass the circle. Countermoves, rotating focalizers, legal IAS and roles, and public counseling aim to keep negotiation transparent and prevent backroom authority from congealing. Agency intel memos and sheriff briefings feed a press pipeline that often recycles official frames, security, infiltration, tight controls into public common sense. Misreadings of culture, for example, Shanti Sena as a police force, become headlines, while Rainbow's slower, show-don't-tell approach struggles to compete with incident-driven news. The chapter's answer is receipts, making water, sanitation, and cleanup visible and verifiable so reporters can quote facts instead of rumor. Conflicts tend to crystallize around gates, vehicles, water deliveries, medical ingress, searches, and citation sweeps. Cleanup can become a political cudgel when crews are blocked and then blamed for lagging restoration. Overflights and selective enforcement fuel double-standard claims, while Rainbow's dispersal and regrouping tactics diffuse some confrontations at the cost of further alienating agencies seeking fixed points of control. There are bright spots: joint tree planting, trail stabilization, habitat fixes, and routine walk-alongs with rangers that resolve problems in real time. These collaborations build trust with land managers and leave tangible benefits, yet the chapter notes an irony: some officials later recast cooperation as leverage to push unrelated compliance. Still, the practical lesson is clear: shared projects create channels for communication that incident postures never will. Rainbow's own policies shape state contact, sanctuary norms around not turning people over without council approval, Shanti Sena boundaries to avoid policy drift, and comms health audits and closures to model self-regulation. Info/rumor control posts maps, sanitation plans, and cleanup ops to keep the city legible to newcomers and observers. The more governance is visible and procedural, the easier it is to defend in public and in court. Assembly rights live alongside duties to land and locals, so the chapter foregrounds pre-event meetings with communities, buy local/don't buy guidance, access road litter crews, and courteous parking plans. Positive neighbor relations often moderate agency posture and reroute media narratives from panic to partnership. In practice, respectful stewardship buys political space for free assembly, making soft power as important as legal power. The long view shows cycles, crackdowns, court checks, periods of accommodation, and new frictions as personnel change. Sometimes a common enemy effect temporarily unifies Rainbow, sometimes genuine partnerships emerge and endure. The movement's durability rests on being a practice rather than an organization. There's no HQ to raid or charter to revoke, so adaptation, not victory, is the operating mode. For agencies, the council is to scale presence to need, avoid emergency end runs on process, and respect First Amendment constraints. For Rainbow, to document operations, keep councils open, and prep legal and liaison playbooks. Joint inspections, clear contact points, and postmortems reduce repeat crises. Both sides win when they trade spectacle for specificity and replace abstractions with shared checklists. The chapter closes by casting the gathering as a stress test for American freedoms on common ground. When process on both sides is respected, consensus in the circle, due process in the office, conflicts shrink and stewardship grows. The ongoing project is coexistence, a leaderless civic culture and a modern state learning to share a forest without making each other into the enemy the script expects. In conclusion, Endless Summer steps back to show Rainbow as a durable, portable civic practice, consensus councils, gift kitchens, calm, stewardship, that keeps popping up wherever people decide to build a leaderless, money-free city for a few days and then erase it. It contrasts this grassroots competence with the bureaucratic frames that misread it, noting how rights fights, media cliches, and police postures recur, yet are often diffused by visible receipts: safe water, clean latrines, thorough cleanup, and patient counseling. The chapter also tracks Rainbow's globalization, borrowed forms adapted from America to Europe and beyond, even in places where hosting is hard, and names the challenges that travel with it: folklore and appropriation, security theater, participation fatigue, and the temptation to calcify informal roles into hierarchies. Its final claim is modest and hopeful: Rainbow's real legacy isn't a perfect society but a repeatable method. Do the work in public, decide together, leave no trace, welcome the next stranger, that lets the circle continue, season after season, like an endless summer. Epilogue 1. A global movement faces a changing world situates Rainbow after the first edition amid big shifts, Seattle 99, the post-9/11 security state, and argues the family endures by holding fast to free assembly, mutual aid, and low-budget civic competence while adapting its forms. In the U.S., Maine Council's centrality has waned, even as Rainbow practices migrate outward into relief and urban efforts, for example, Welcome Home Kitchens and Rainbow Relief, showing the model works off-site, too. The epilogue samples critiques and studies, including a shaky ER visits analysis, to suggest that while any mass camp stresses local systems, clear water/latrine practices and peer care mitigate risks, it also revisits perennial tensions, violence and peacekeeping, open membership, and media/agency frames. Overall, it portrays a fission fusion movement that keeps reassembling across borders and crises, exporting its toolkit: feed people, decide together, clean up after, into a changed world without abandoning its core. Epilogue 2, Freedom to Gather in the 21st Century argues that while Rainbow has gone global, the U.S. Context has grown markedly more repressive, spotlighting the 2008 Wyoming Kitty Village incident where Forest Service law enforcement used pepperball rounds during a pursuit that spilled into a family area, and where later documents, ACLU/OIG/National Incident Reports, reveal mass pretext stops, witness intimidation, and even discussions of deadly force postures around gatherings. The epilogue contrasts official narratives with eyewitness accounts, framing a pattern: emergency-style policing, fishing expedition traffic enforcement, and after-the-fact justifications that criminalize a constitutionally protected assembly. Yet it also credits Rainbow's restraint and its tactical ecology, temporary autonomous zones and a fish-infusion rhythm, for the movement's survival, liberating time more than territory, dissolving when pressure spikes, and reappearing elsewhere. The takeaway is double-edged: civil liberties risks are higher, but the method endures. Document everything, keep councils open, practice de-escalation, and keep exercising the right to gather.